Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe. I used to work as a lifeguard for a scouting camp situated on a huge lake, deeper in a pine forest. The kiddos would spend a week earning merit badges and swimming in the lake and getting splinters, then head home, only for the next batch to come out and do the same thing. This meant staff, like me, would spend a month or two living at the camp in tents. The staff campgrounds was a solid 10-minute walk from the showers, so if you wanted to be clean, you had to walk the whole way down and back along this gravel road. Usually we went in groups, but occasionally we'd go alone. Walking down one night with my towel and sundries, and I look up through the pine trees to see a bright light. Cool, I thought. That must be Venus or Jupiter or something. I reached the showers, basically wooden stalls hooked up to the water line. As I'm showering, I look up at this light. As I study it, I realize it's way too bright to be a star or a planet. It's almost like a helicopter with a floodlight about 5 miles away, around 30 degrees off from being directly overhead. Thing is, there was no noise, and the light wasn't moving. It's just there. I stare at it for a good 5 minutes trying to figure out what the heck it is, when it suddenly turns to the side and zips off. From the distance it was at, there was no way a helicopter could move that quickly. Not overly bizarre, I guess, but it still weirded me out. A thread came up a few days ago about unsolved mysteries, so I thought I'd share a creepy story that happened to my dad and his cousin when they were young. Now this was about 20 years ago and wasn't really in seclusion, but nonetheless it is pretty disturbing. When my dad was young, he would sleep over at his cousin's house during the weekends. The house was all one floor consisting of the front door entrance attached to the living room and kitchen. The living room had a long hallway for the bathroom, his aunt and uncle's room, then the bedroom where him and his cousin would sleep. His cousin's room was pretty small with only a bed, dresser, and a closet. The bed was pressed against the window, so when they slept, they would face the closet and the doorway. One night around 3 a.m., my dad recalls seeing shadows coming from the closet and tries to wake his cousin up, without any success. He doesn't see anything else or hear anything, so he falls back asleep. The next night, my dad hears a noise coming from outside the window behind the bed. He wakes his cousin up and they run to the bedroom where the uncle and the aunt are sleeping, with nothing else happening for the remainder of the evening. A couple weekends later, my dad stays over for another sleepover. This is where it gets weird. At some point late in the night, at 1 a.m., my dad hears something from the closet and more shadows moving. Something must have freaked him out because he starts screaming. All of a sudden, a man sprints out of the closet, down the hall, and out the door. His cousin wakes up as well as his aunt and uncle. The cops come and do some investigating, but never end up finding anything. Basically, the assumption is some creep has been sneaking inside the house and hiding in his cousin's closet. The window behind them would be easy for a creep to look in and inspect the area. Overall, it just gives me chills when they tell me the story. They just seem so frightened of it still. It's been a long time for me, but I used to go camping a lot by myself. When I got older, I used to go on sailing trips alone. Load up the boat, leave a float plan with someone and disappear for a week or so. In both cases, the scariest stuff to me usually started with an unexplained noise followed by my imagination. Some examples. One summer I spent enough time alone in the woods, I reached a point where I could smell other humans before I could see them. Well, maybe not them exactly, but I could smell deodorant, makeup, etc. Once you've been in the woods that long, smells that aren't native to the area stand out. That's not relevant to the story, but hopefully sets the scene to tell you how long I was alone for. Anyway, I was chilling out on a log doing I don't remember what, when a pine cone hit the ground near me. Then another one. First I thought someone was throwing them at me, but no one was around. I listened, I smelled, I looked, but nothing was out of place. Another pine cone hit the ground even closer to me. I began to really freak out. I don't believe in things like Bigfoot, but my imagination began to take over, and I wondered if something was out there throwing them at me. I grabbed my pack and began to walk away. Another few pine cones hit the ground around me as I got that weird chill running up my spine. I was really freaked out and I hightailed it out of there. I don't know what, if anything, was throwing them at me, but that scared the shit out of me. Just typing this brought back a chill. So in short, I think my imagination was really creeping me out the most. Might have been the wind, or squirrels in the trees, who knows, but I was scared. Number 2. After a long day of sailing, I anchored up in a protected bayou for the night. Usually this is a pretty popular spot for overnighting, but on this night I was the only boat in the bayou. The forecast called for a line of storms to come through, so I made an early dinner, double-checked my anchor, and went to bed. Several hours later, I awoke in pitch-black darkness to a loud and very eerie wailing. The sound wasn't human, and I never heard of any animal make this noise. It varied in a little pitch and intensity and seemed to be coming from all around outside the boat. I was scared out of my mind. I didn't move, pretended I was asleep, just in case there was something out there waiting to get me. I listened to that sound for a good 10 minutes trying to localize it, racking my brain for what it might be. Coyotes? Dolphins? Aliens? No clue. But it was not a natural sound. It was scary, and it was dark. As this was going on, lightning flashed in the distance, followed a few seconds later by a roll of thunder. I decided I had to go topside to check the boat before the storm hit, and if I was going to die, I'd die fighting and not curled up hiding in my bunk. So I grabbed a flashlight, pulled on my shorts, and headed to the companionway. When I turned the light on, I could swear the noise got louder and rose in pitch. Freaky. I carried on, rushing through the hatch and shining my light all around the boat to find nothing. I fired up my spotlight and shone it all around the boat looking for the source of noise, which had seemingly died down since I entered the cockpit, but all the million candle power revealed was a brown pelican perched on a piling. He squawked and flew away when the light revealed him. Gathered my courage as the raindrops began to fall and went on deck where I discovered the source of the noise. The sound I was hearing was the wind rushing through my sailboat's rigging, the metal wires that hold up the mast. The wind was apparently at just the right velocity to cause the wire to resonate similar to how a piano works, and the hull of my boat was somehow amplifying and distorting that sound. From there, my own fears and imagination took hold and scared me silly. Spent the next few hours reading and watching the storms roll through. Number 3. Finally, I had beached the boat on a secluded spit of land for the night. For a change of scenery, made a small campfire to cook over. Needing to pee and not wanting to climb back in the boat, I walked about knee-deep into the sea and began my business. Now the cool part was that there was phosphorescence in the water that night. You disturb the water and it glows green for a short bit. So I'm standing there mesmerized by the green glow my pee stream is stirring up in the water when something hits my leg. I guess I scared it as much as it scared me because it took off out to the sea, leaving a green trail about 3 feet wide and stretching out 6 or 7 feet behind it. I have no idea what that was, but it was big and fleshy feeling. At least this time it wasn't my imagination. I love caving. Absolutely love it. I even joined a caving club. They send you an information packet once a month about a featured cave tour. One month they sent out a packet containing a 7 to 8 hour wild man caving tour. I've been on wild man tours before, and they're not too difficult. Maybe some rappelling or mild climbing, nothing over an hour. This one had real danger. Climb too much to the right and you get stuck. Slip too far and you can fall in a hole. Getting rescued in a deep cave is basically impossible. There were 5 of us, 3 tour guides, me, and another person. About halfway through the cave, they let us rest on this off-shallow ledge thing that was right next to the biggest drop of the cave. The guides told us how with larger groups they did the typical total darkness and had everyone turn off their headlamps and just look around. When he motioned to us to follow suit, we did. After about 30 seconds, there was this sound. It honestly sounded like footsteps, and then falling rocks, and finally a screech. Immediately the head guide flipped on his headlamp and looked at us with a panicked glint. I think he thought one of us had fallen or jumped off the cliff. He turned to the 2 other tour guides and asked if they heard it. They did, but they couldn't explain it. They hadn't moved and us 2 were still there. He radioed to the surface and asked if any of the normal tours were missing anyone. This was about 3 hours away from the start of the wild man path, and without our headlamps, it was literally staring into a wall of black. There was no way an inexperienced or an experienced caver would have made it that far. The guides asked us if we want to continue with the experience and would understand and refund us if we decided not to. We went along and eventually completed the tour. Everything else was perfectly normal. I have no idea what that could have been. It wasn't animal footsteps, but that screech was blood-chilling. My family has a cabin in a remote area of the Rocky Mountains. There's this one particular hike nearby that we would always go on when I was growing up that took you up a large hill, cut down into a ravine, and took you down to an abandoned mining cabin. It was really cool, and the cabin was full of old antiques, books, cans, furniture. So last summer I took my significant other on the hike to show off this cool abandoned cabin. It had been about 5 years since I'd been on this hike, and it took us a while to find the trailhead because it was so overgrown. We hacked our way through the bush, and luckily I had a really good memory for the general direction we should be going. As we were heading down the ravine, we finally saw the roof of the old cabin. Excited that we found our way through all the brush, we headed towards it. But when we went inside, it was completely different than the last time I'd been there. Instead of cool old furniture and antiques, there was a nest. The nest stretched from the floor to the ceiling and across 2 entire walls of cabin. But the most unsettling thing about it is that the nest was made of bones. Not small bones either. They were huge bones. One was the size of a human clavicle and others were bigger. I immediately had this terrible feeling and wanted to get the F out as soon as possible. Well, we booked it out of there and ran up the ravine as quickly as our dog could keep up. We reached the top in less than 30 minutes and were at the top of the hill where we could look down and see our own cabin below. We stopped to catch our breath at the top, which is fairly flat and has a lot of visibility. I decided to use that moment to try and get a signal on the sat phone from the high point. I got a hold of my mom and we were having a quick chat, but I kept hearing a strange noise. It was off in the distance though, so I couldn't make it out, but my significant other was hearing it too, getting increasingly uncomfortable. I could finally make out the noise, but realized that was because the noise was getting louder and closer. It was the sound of 2 metal objects being clanked together, like a spoon banging against a skillet. Then my dog gets super defensive and starts snarling and barking in the direction of where we just hiked out of. So now we are completely freaked the F out. I hang up the call, we grab our packs and run the rest of the 2 miles back to our cabin. We reported our experience and gave our photos of the cabin interior to the local forest service, who concluded that the nest was most likely a bear or cougar den. But that noise we heard following us out of the ravine will haunt my nightmares for years to come. We had this huge family event where everyone would take off for 2 weeks and go camping. The campsite took 7 hours to get to and was and is one of the most popular places to go camping in my state. I was 16, so I brought a friend with me. We stayed in the tent because we like to stay up late and freak each other out. Well, one night I woke up having to use the bathroom. The outhouse was up near the end of the loop, so it was maybe a 5-minute walk to get there. I wake my friend up and we head up there. As we're heading back, we hear this scream. It sounded far away. We figured people were having fun over near the cabins or something, but decided to investigate and head out to the lake. When we got to the lake, all we could hear was coyotes going insane on the other side. The lake is like 5 miles wide and 15 miles long, so we knew they weren't close. We ran like hell back to the tent. These damn coyotes go crazy for the next 30 minutes, and then complete silence. That is until we hear something walking around our tent. You could hear whatever it was sniffing around, and it plops down near the side of the tent. The outline was just this huge lump, heavy breathing, and then this weird growl. It did not sound like a bear, but it stayed there all night sniffing our tent, lying next to it. We were terrified. Of course, we're not going to scream for help because that will just cause problems. Eventually, we fall asleep and whatever it was had left by the time my family came out of the camper. It was probably a bear, but the growl sounded so much deeper than a bear growl. Found out the screaming was from an actual bear encounter though. Some couple came out of their camper to find a bear tearing up their campsite. They weren't smart enough to hide the food or stay in the camper. I went camping with a group of friends on some public land that I knew quite well. Spent a lot of time out there trail riding and camping most weekends for about 3 years. We set up camp at a spot that we had used a few times and had partied with other people at this spot on a couple of occasions. This trip, there were 6 of us, and 4 of my friends decided to go to a party we found out about while on the trails earlier in the day. I was tired from digging my Jeep out of a sand washout that I had no business driving into, but I looked pretty cool for about 2 minutes until I got really stuck. Anyways, my friend's girlfriend decided to stay at camp with me when everyone else left for the party. We watched the fire die down and listened to the animals. I got a kick out her being afraid of coyotes making noise on the other side of the swamp. I assured her it was fine and they wouldn't bother us. After a bit, we got into our sleeping bags. As I'm starting to doze off, she asked, "Did you hear that?" I just ignore her and try to fall asleep. A minute or two later, she sits up again and asks again. I respond, "Nope," and go to sleep. Then not even 1 minute later, I hear what sounds like an ice cream truck on the trail we were on. This trail is one way in and out, about 3 miles long, and ends in a clearing, and we were camped within a quarter mile of the entrance and exit. We also went to the end of the trail after we ate dinner, and there wasn't anyone on it then. No one drove past either. I did not hear any engine noise, only the creepy-ass music. Not to mention the trail was a ruddy mess, so even a vehicle with a reasonably quiet exhaust would be revving high enough to be heard throughout the woods. I didn't tell her this because I didn't want to scare her more, but it scared the crap out of me. So when she asked me if I heard it that time, we got in the Jeep, went to the party, and I slept on a raggedy couch next to a bonfire in a sand pit. Not sure if this counts, but I was a wildland firefighter in Yarnell. My crew was almost sent at around the same time as the 19 firefighters that died there, but we weren't sent until a few hours later. So when we got there, that's when we learned all those firefighters were dead. That night, we were sleeping in the desert. Many of us don't like tent, so we just made do with tarp on ground and sleeping bags on top of the tarp. Anyways, I was awake by a horrible wind. It was a very powerful wind that blew sand and bugs against everything so hard that it hurt. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head to shut out the wind and sand. About half an hour later, there's a huge alarm and a lot of people running and all of that. I suddenly pop out and saw everybody was piling up in a vehicle. Knowing that the fire wasn't far away and the wind was crazy, I took no chance. I rushed into the vehicle and we all left right then. As I turned to look back, I can see that the fire was not too far away from where we were and would eventually get to where we were in just a few minutes. That wasn't a pleasant night. Another time, we were working very deep in a forest where you literally wonder if you were the first human in the area. We were on night shift and we were supposed to stand apart by 50 yards and watch the fire in distance. By that time, I was quite used to being in dark forest that I'd become so comfortable in it because I know there's nothing nearby that is a threat to me. So when I saw something move in dark about 20 feet away, didn't think much of it, but I was eager to see what animal it was. Turned my light on, and first thing I saw was an upside down triangular face and massive ears with huge glowing eyes. The face looked rather gray due to the light and ashes. Now, all this happened in a span of probably 5 seconds, but to me it felt like forever. For a moment, my heart nearly stopped as I thought I saw a goblin. I kept telling myself, no, you aren't crazy. This isn't a goblin. You aren't looking at a goblin. And just as I was about to try to decide whether to scream for the nearest guys, I saw this creature move and realized it was a fawn covered in ashes.